present it. They have meetings with their chair as well as with me throughout the semester, and then we come to this final review and we invite guests. And today we have Bork Redwood from Leo Daly. We have David Hairsign from Bonsa Hairsign. We have Colleen Healy from her firm, Standalone, used to be with McIntyre. Then we have Cara James, who's working at Montgomery, exactly, Montgomery College, and Carlos Reavers from Catholic University. So we have an interesting group of reviewers. So today we're going to start off on Ralph's Purple Line down at Langley Park.
What a mess it is.
And what a mess it is. If you've got we can blame it on University Boulevard, Purple Line construction, etc. We're going to start off with Langley Park, then we're going to go over to Pittsburgh, and then we're going to go into Philadelphia, and then we're going to go into Hoboken, and then we're going to end up on the Eastern Shore in Maryland. So we're going to take a big sort of circle around this basic neighborhood. So Sarah's going to take us to Langley Park, and her thesis will start now.
Thank you, Professor. I'll try to make the purple line a little bit better. So I'd first like to thank you all for coming. Good morning. I'd like to thank Professor Bell, my chair, Professor Dupuy for all their help, my friends and family for all their support. The thesis topic is Connecting Crossroads, Designing the Future of Langley Park. So on the agenda, I will start with explaining, because the thesis is so intertwined with place, I'll explain why this area is special. Next, go on to the issues that arise from it, explain the site, and then move on to design. So Langley Park is an inner ring suburb of Washington, D.C., 2 miles from the University of Maryland to the west. What makes it a special area and an interest topic for this thesis was twofold. One is the percentage of Hispanic population living especially in the core at the main intersection, which is over 80%. And two, it's going to be the stop of 2 of the Purple Line stops, that one will be at the start of the community and one will be at the very end. So the issues that arise from this was first immigration, integration, diversity, and second, how equitable TOD development could be placed in this community. Langley Park would kind of be in the intersection of all of these definitions of culture, real estate, and design, which we will hopefully add to it. Today in the United States, out of the 44 million immigrants, around 20 million of them are Hispanic. And from the entire population, around 60 million are from the Hispanic population. You can see that they are mostly in the larger cities. So immigrant communities have a lot of benefits with them. First, economic benefits. They create businesses. They revitalize neglected inner city and urban neighborhoods, and they also provide the labor for these neighborhoods. They have cultural advantages. These are resources, attractions, which make them rich in culture and give them advantage over other city neighborhoods. What's very important is their social capital and the social networks that exist within these communities. And last, transnationalism is about the growth and investment they send back to their countries of origin and the trade that they can bring in. We cannot forget the strains, especially in low-income communities like Langley Park, the increase in language and cultural differences, demand for low-cost housing, and the strain they put on social systems, and also demand for health care. Latin American communities are very important because they are the largest immigrant group that don't show melting into the pot of America culturally, and also their lifestyle, their social networks, their urban living is completely in line with all the sustainable ways of development that we look for. The next important fact is that their population will grow even if immigration stops. Birth rates have come down, immigration has come down, but the population will still be growing, and it is projected by 2060 that they will be around 30% of the population of the country. They are very fundamental to business success in the country. In 2015, their GDP was around 2.3 trillion, which if they were a country within themselves would make them 7th globally. And they're assuming significant buying power with rising median income. So the first question is, what happens in cultural contact? Historically, assimilation has been the way of acculturation that has been seen in communities but research shows that the best way would be integration, where you keep your own cultural identity, but at the same time have a relationship and seek a relationship with the host country. This is both beneficial to the host country and at the same time psychologically beneficial to the immigrant group. The second question is, what are the opportunities and risks of the Purple Line coming to this area? The first and most important one would be the rising real estate prices and the risk of gentrification. For this, we have to look at legislation, we have to invest in these communities, and we have to look at TOD and have mixed income, because a lot of research done in metropolitan areas that transit have gone through show that after a while, because of gentrification, transit is not seen to be used more. So we need these, mixed income communities to provide that walkable community that we need. For this, we can learn from precedents. For example, there have been a lot of projects in the Bay Area, in Portland, one is Fruitvale in Oakland, which basically has the exact same situation, and they used a lot of grants, community unions, tax incentives to actually build the transit stations. The last question is, how do we translate all of what we said into design? First is looking at principles of place and identity. The first principle would be distinctiveness and continuity, where we can have distinct spaces, but also have continuity to the cultural heritage and to historic backgrounds. These are places that a lot of research done in immigrant communities show that they feel more at home, where they are places where they are free to be. They do go to larger cities because of jobs, but those cities are also places where they feel the freedom to be who they are. That could be in different scales of homes and gardens, especially for immigrants that come from Latin American rural community villages. And cosmopolitan canopies are defined as places where those social barriers fall down, interaction takes place, and people start trusting each other. And this mostly happens in public plazas or marketplaces where everything is happening at the same time and every single culture is represented. And last is self-esteem and self-efficacy, which means places of pride and income, places of support. So we need to provide job markets, business incubators, affordable housing, community buildings, education spaces, and social services. So I'd like to end this section with a map on, we talked about how important integration and diversity is, but what do our cities look like? If we look at the segregation map of Washington, such as a lot of the bigger cities, there are a lot of historic reasons for this, but we do still see these dividing lines between the different ethnicities and how they gather in some places. So this thesis is basically designing those lines and trying to blur those lines together. Our objectives are to create a sustainable, walkable community where people can live, work, and play, mixed income, multicultural, where everyone is represented, creating connections across these neighborhoods, across these lines, and creating places where people are free to be. We should also take advantage of transit and best management of natural resources. So a couple of places that are really important to the beginning of the project are food markets, farmers market, education and community centers, and also support services. So the site. Lake Park is an inner ring suburb of Washington, D.C., 2 miles from UMD. As I said, it will be have 2 stations of the Purple Line within it. Looking at the larger population of around the area, it's around 37 million, a household size of 3.4. And as you can see, the median income is below the Maryland average. And on the right is more of the focus area of this thesis, which is around 12,000. So looking at different maps of household income, education, average household size, and population, we can see that the core of Langley Park has all these issues with it. Historically, carved from plantations in the 1700s, the area turned into farmland, and Langley Park was named and became Langley Park in 1924 when the McCormick, the Hart family, bought 500 acres of land and built the mansion right there in the middle, which today is home to Casa Maryland, which is an NGO that works with the Latino community. In the 1940s, the area attracted a lot of post-war housing. In 1963, the 556 acres of the property was sold to housing developers. After that, it became home to a lot of white residents. Later, after desegregation, African Americans, and then for the decades onward, it became an attraction to Latin Americans, especially from El Salvador and Guatemala due to civil wars there. So it's a typical suburb of garden apartments. This is basically what you see walking around the entire area. Strip malls and parking lots, and neglect and lack of any identity. But the opportunity is the people. It's the social structures that are there. It's the social capital. Interviewing people there, talking to people, they were telling me how it's a place where people are always walking around. It's at corners you see little people selling things. So it's got a community. It just doesn't have the urban landscape that goes with it. Our focus is to the top of University Boulevard, which would be right here, the Purple Line station and the transit center over there. So my focus is those few parcels, and as you can see, they are very big parcels of land. It's around 44 acres, and looking at the development of to the south of University Boulevard is around 54 acres, which is just looking at redeveloping and massing and creating connections. So the first step of the process of design was finding the needs of the community. Looking at assets, the important assets that are important here, one is the Tacoma Langley Crossroad Transit Center, CASA, which is right there in the middle, the mansion, right there. And the elementary school and community center, which is right above CASA, and the community center is it has a lot of programs that go with it. So first step was interviewing residents, attorneys that work, or social services that work in the area, and also doing a focus group with the teens and kind of getting an idea of what they need, what they think their community should look like. They gave me ideas from how a library should look like to how a restaurant should function, and so I created a list of needed spaces from there. Step 2 is master planning. So looking at the green infrastructure in the area, there are 2 parks that that pass by Langley Park from the top and the bottom. Looking at bike paths, how they just stop when they hit Langley Park. And then topography of how it gets so intense, especially to the south here, that you basically can't create connections into the community down here. It just ends there. Yes. So putting all those layers on each other, the idea was to create a link between the 2 green infrastructures at the top of the bottom, and finding the intersection of where these greens could connect. Connecting the transit center into the community toward CASA, and then going up to the school, the elementary school that's up there. Next, we're looking at major and minor roads. So there's basically no street hierarchy. Parcels are really big, so the main streets just go around all these parcels. And looking at sidewalks and walkability, again, sidewalks just end. Especially with these really big commercial parcels, it's not really walkable at all, even to the stations. Looking at transit, and then layering these on top of each other to first create connections in between the neighborhoods around and across the Purple Line, creating a street hierarchy, and also adding a bus route that could maybe function outside the walkability radius in between the 2 Purple Line stations and serve the community. So the synthesis would be having our most development and mixed use toward the stations. Creating New Hampshire does have its own plan, which will have a green going up. Adding a green, connecting the transit into the community toward CASA, and then trying to find something to put in between that would transition from this mixed-use commercial area into the residential area and putting services as that intermediary there. So placing every of the list of needs into here would kind of look like this. It would be the bus bay here, going into the food market or Cosmopolitan Canopy, having a public plaza, connect, and then to transition into housing, having a library and community center, which has all its services, that social services, vocational schools, co-housing, job training, all in that area, and then going into residential. So in our places diagram, we can see all of these places come together, and I'll walk you through every single space a little bit on. Looking at the master plan of how, so the idea was kind of to break these big parcels into smaller blocks, about 250 to 300 feet, and creating more connections in the community and across the streets. This is a perspective from the southwest. You can see the transit center there, the green and the plaza that go into the community and reach CASA, and then the food market and restaurants and commercial center that are at the intersection. Just a quick look at land use. We can see how we start with more mixed-use commercial and closer to the purple line stations, and then transition into housing when we move toward the center. And then creating a street hierarchy of major roads, adding a bus route, adding bike share stops, and adding more connections across the streets and inside the community. So to walk through every space, we'll start with the intersection, which is the Mercado Langley Park or the Langley Park Food Market. It basically has an open plaza on the right, which could function as a farmer's market or could just be an open space. And then the plaza and the green to the other side, and the market kind of flows in between these two. The buildings on the right would be two-story commercial buildings, mostly restaurants, with different ethnic food. And the rendering of the area. So this is where a farmer's market is going on. If we walk into it, at the very end we have this tree that kind of gives a character to the end of the plaza. And walking forward, we have the restaurants, outdoor spaces. To the left is the service street that serves the food market. It kind of functions as an art walk to have people just walk around everywhere, even in the service. Next would be the Langley Plaza. So this is what we see from the transit center. We see a lot of green, but then we move forward, and in front of the market, we have an area where food trucks and out street food could be positioned, because they currently don't have a place at all. And then moving forward, we have a green and a plaza in the back. These are supposed to be those places of freedom, those places where nothing is really programmed, especially for the green, and people are just free to spend time there. And a night rendering of how that space could look like. Lastly would be the Langley Park Library and Community Center, which is kind of the in-between of the residential and here. So the library has the plaza in front of it, which that plaza could function, is big enough to kind of function as a farmer's market, festivals for agriculture, could function as a concert space, or an ice rink, which the kids asked me for, so I had to put it in. A rendering of the library with a farmer's market. And to the back of that is a community center, which what they really needed is a multifunction space that could spread out and have outdoor spaces too. So that is the space you see in the back, and then having steps so they do have outdoor movie screenings and also the community gardens, which just work with the community center. Lastly would be our Market Street. So the idea for the Market Street was to create a street section which would give extra outdoor space to the retail, because a lot of these local stores put a lot of their merchandise on the outside. So it's giving about 15 feet of extra space to the sidewalk for the retail, either with loges or tent spaces or different kinds of coverings, and then having outdoor seating. So a couple of renderings of how the street would look like if it's a restaurant. It could be a grocery store, or it could be retail. The Market Street ends with a green, and the kind of scale goes down to townhomes, so that we kind of transition. And further back, the street goes more into residential, and this area also has a small park at the very end of it. So to explain my plans, I will run you through a couple of section perspectives of how everything ties together. So this is a section cut through right here, which would be New Hampshire Avenue, and looking at the market, where we have that indoor eating or seating area for the food market that's beside the street, kind of giving it an edge. The green. Moving into the market, you can see the farmers market booths, the restaurants, and also having booths that are 2 floors you have sitting on the top. The green plaza to your left, and then you can see how there's kind of a flow between the plaza at the intersection and the plaza and the green over here. Next would be the 2-story restaurants and bars, kind of giving the area nightlife on 2 levels, which would have outdoor seating on the top level and the plaza to your left. So next, the interior of the library. It's basically a hybrid structure with boxes of spaces. The ground floor would be a bookstore, the children's section. The second floor would be a Head Start education center, mostly for languages. And the top floor has a media room, study places which the kids really asked for again, places where they can come and do their homework, and also could kind of double as a seniors center, because they do have a lot of activities for them. And in the section here, you can see at the back of the library, there's also an amphitheater that could be used for the community. And lastly, the community center, I forgot one thing. To the right of the library, we have the health center. And a lot of parking is behind all these developments that could be accessed to the public as well. Next would be the community center, the activity rooms. To the left of the building, having a community kitchen. And also to the right, we have buildings that function as gyms, which the community does not have, an art gallery, and the vocational and job training that would be at the back. So a couple of additions to the project. One would be looking at the Casa Mansion and the area around it. So to the left, you can see a Google image of what it currently looks like. In the middle, where these roads come to the mansion, you can see that there's parking and streets on the side, but there's also this street in the middle. And what's interesting is that there's a lot of crime going on there, and I've been told that it's pretty dangerous. So kind of changing that into another structure of adding a small neighborhood park to it. To the left of the mansion is just an open space, turning that into gardens. And the community really asks for a soccer field, because that is their main sport. Because it's such a large field, it couldn't fit into the plazas, but there's the school and the community center that exists. My recommendation is to move the community center beside the library and give this building as an addition to the school for its needed spaces, and then have sports fields to the south of it. A couple of other things would be having a large parking lot beside the transit center and the Purple Line. University of Maryland student housing would be maybe a good function to put on the other side of the street. It would be really good access for the students, but also not mixing it too much with the community with the community amenities that are up there. And also looking at the University Boulevard street section, which the plan they have right now is kind of having the bikes right beside the cars in the street, so I kind of flipped that, added green, the bikes, walking, sidewalks, having a service street on this side to move all these residential and retail a little bit back. But then on the other side, we couldn't do that because it's a topography, so kind of giving an extra setback to have stormwater management facilities with a green in front of the buildings. In terms of housing, just a little bit of sketches that happened was kind of to have affordable housing. Maybe we could go modular, creating some modules of spaces where you can add and subtract to create the number of bedrooms you need. This would facilitate construction, and then if you want a market rate, you just add one module to it, make it bigger. But also having a typology that, for instance, in this one, because of the family structures, we could have units that have separate bathrooms, bedrooms, living rooms, but then share a kitchen, especially for extended family. And then placing them together, taking a module out to create communal spaces on the floors for social interactions, and also in the neighborhood scale, having greens in between the buildings for community engagement, playgrounds, or just social spaces. I should say that the aim of the project was kind of to create enough development that if we have about 20% affordable housing, we can actually replace everyone right now. So right now, these big parcels only have around 700 units, but with the development that's just added to this part of the project, we can replace all of that, add a little bit of affordable, and try to figure that out. And the next would be trying to figure that out in phasing. So the first step would be taking out the big commercial parcels, adding in mixed use and housing, adding in the plaza. Next, taking out commercial again, but taking out one parcel of the housing projects, replacing that again with better housing, more mixed use, taking out more parcels. A lot of these residential complexes are very low in quality. That is why it's looking at phasing of taking them all out. 2 of the complexes are on the country's list of worst residents. So there wasn't much of a quality to even repair these buildings. Phase 3, phase 4, and lastly phase 5, which we can see the final figure ground of the development. So the aim of this project was to look at Langley Park's future and a couple of scales of the master plan, how it links to the city and around it, urban placemaking, places that people are free to use as they will, and places where they are free to show their identity, and also looking at the neighborhood scale. So I would like to end with saying that diversity and integration will be the future of our communities, and they will change our urban landscapes. Communities that offer the welcome mat to all immigrants will be the ones that benefit most and will foster that integration and cultural bridging. I have an animation that runs through the entire project, but it's very fast. So,
hold your breath.
Yes, I think it runs even faster than that. Just think of it as fly through with an airplane. Okay. So this is coming from the purple line, the farmer's market, looking at the market, going to the end where you can see the tree, the art walk, the service street, and then if we turn and go into the market over here, we have the trucks, the green, the plaza, the commercial, the library. If we turn left here, we have the community gardens, the community center, and the spaces outdoors there. A daycare transitions into a park, a small pond at the very end for stormwater housing. And then if we go straight from the library, we go down the Market Street You can see the outdoor spaces, the seating areas, and then it transitions with a small park into housing. And then we still have housing and end the street with another park with more dense housing at the end. Yes. So, with that, thank you.
Sara, I have questions.
Carlos, could you use the microphone?
I don't know where the mic is.
Yeah, they're just being shy. No, you have to use it because what happens if you don't use the microphone, in a little while we lose the acoustics in the space.
Okay, no problem. I forgot that you use this. Yeah, Sara, to begin, I'm impressed with the scope of things that you dealt with, and I'm very familiar with the area. So what I have is actually not so much question about your project, but questions how you approach the project, because it's a complex project. And I would be asking myself, obviously you have been dealing with this for a year, but I'd be asking myself, a number of things that I want you to clarify for us. One of the things that I am curious about is how you find, how far you wanted to go, other than, there's a limited time for these, but knowing the place as living very close to it, I think two things that it extends well beyond what you actually intervene. And so I'm a little curious about what you were thinking was going to happen, both towards the north, towards at least until Pinecrest, where the international market used to be, and to the south. You stopped way before the bridge that actually goes to College Park, where I think it's still part of. And then on New Hampshire, you mentioned that there's a plan on New Hampshire, but you don't explain it. So I imagine that there is an intention to integrating with it or questioning it that would be relevant for us to understand. So that's one thing. How do you define your extent within what you did? Then I have the question that I see the purple line actually making easy something that is a big problem now, which is the connection between north and south across the university, which by the way I think you assume is going to be resolved, and so you basically develop the north of it, but you're also changing the gravitas of the activity from university towards the east side, the side of College Park, by the way, towards New Hampshire. So those questions I have, and I think those are relevant to understand a little more what you're doing.
Okay. So in choosing how much and where to intervene, it was mostly, due to time, trying to bring it down and taking the development out first that would be easiest to take out first. That's why I looked at a lot of the commercial, because they're really big parcels of parking and not a really important or worthy building that would be kept. That's why I did a lot of development here. I stopped here because of the topography change. There are no street connections here because the topography changes so extremely that you can't have these connections. I kind of looked at this area because they were the complexes that actually had the worst situation. The rest, I think, could be phased out later, could be thought of later, but I kind of chose the ones that should go first, and these people should get better living quality first. And in terms of connections to the other side, I have to go back really back, but I tried to place stoplights at important streets. Okay, here. So the blue are kind of the connections that go through. To connect to this area, only 2 connections were enough because here we don't have that much topography, but here it was just ending. So the reason to have these was just so that people can turn left. And then these, they could go through the community, and then trying to have these connections from this side also to here, wherever it would make sense to have a stoplight, especially where the purple line is. And then New Hampshire, I think the development plan is very much to the south. For here, they only have a street section, which is basically 6 lanes in the middle and 2 service streets on the side, which are very narrow actually. So I kind of looked at it as adding green to it, having a bike path that connects the parks from the bike paths that come from the park from the bottom to the park from the top. That's the extent of what I looked at for there. I hope I answered all the questions.
Kind of. I have one more question. You're increasing the density, right?
Yes.
So how many more people can you
So
just tell me percentage. Sure.
I can give you units right now. So right now, what I took out was the development to the top is around 700 units, and it's at 4,000 units that could be replaced with this, and it's zoned to be even more dense than this.
That's
But I
what
took
I'm saying. How
it.
many are you adding to the 4,000 that are already there?
No, there's 700 there. I'm taking it to 4,000. Yep.
And how do you base this decision? Because if you look at what's going on up north in Wheaton, they're going 18 stories and 20 stories. So
Right.
how do you think that may not happen here?
There's a height limit. I am at my height limit right now, but what I thought was there's a lot of open space in these parcels. So that was kind of like looking at having these amenities in these parcels, bringing the density down here, but then if development comes in and the parcels around it, we could add more to there. But this was kind of the step before all of that, of what this community can offer as an identity to bring in those kind of developments.
And you envision these newcomers as also a team part of the community, or they could be as diverse as you would like them to be?
They could be as diverse as, but right now what I have here, all the restaurant names are restaurants that already exist in the corridor, so they've just been relocated here. But there is enough retail or commercial on the bottom that could bring in more. And then to the south, I just looked at adding the density, so there could be a lot more commercial and housing to the south of University Boulevard
I
also.
see all these in
Right, all of these.
I wish this was happening in Wheaton, by the way.
Well, to that point, you've done a lot of work here, and I am really impressed by the scope of work here. But I think it would be interesting to see, I think this idea can be applied in a lot of places around the DMV, this intersection of culture, of transportation. We're kind of in this hub of education as well. And then there's also a lot of greenery coming into this hub. And I think we have that opportunity in a lot of different places. So I'd be interested to see where else we could implement this other than Langley. The other thing I was really impressed with your ideas that you talked about in the beginning regarding, assimilation versus integration, creating a community that allows people to just be who they are. And I think this concept of blurring the lines of different cultures is really interesting to me. I'm wondering, you talked about the community engagement in the very beginning of this process. And I think at the beginning of designing any development, that is a common first step, right? We engage with the community. But it's really important to continue to keep engaging with the community. And I think what I'm seeing here, the way that you're integrating or you're implementing these ideas is by giving them these open spaces, these parks, the farmers market. And these are spaces that allow people to come in and recreate their culture with daily activities. But I think what I'm looking for is something that's more of like a semi-permanent space that you're giving back to the community. If you're talking to them in the beginning, and then you go into this design process and you come up with polished spaces that they can enjoy, and a lot of the spaces that they asked for, that's very nice. But I think in continuing to engage them, there's spaces that you can give back to them and allow them to kind of take over and design it for themselves. And I see opportunities for that in your projects. like these service corridors, like when you were doing the fly-through, there was a really wide service corridor that kind of seemed, there were a lot of great spaces that you were flying over, but that one didn't seem to have any activity happening other than service.
Of the art walk? It didn't have art on the video. It should have had it.
Is that the art walk?
Yes.
Okay, it's the same space. So I guess that is more what I'm looking for, just kind of giving that back to the community and letting them make it their own. They have the polished green spaces, they have the farmer's market, they can engage in daily activities, but that's something that they can kind of bring to life on their own. So I definitely appreciate that you've included that in your project.
I would love to do that. I think I've learned that sometimes you don't even know the question. You have to go into the community to even know what you're supposed to question. And that was really important when I was talking to the kids. They're teens, but they know a lot because of the identity that they have. They had a lot of amazing questions, of ideas that I tried to fit in wherever I could.
Yeah, I feel like as designers, there are only so many opportunities we have to create the culture of the place. It's up to the community to do that, and I think that this type of open maker space for them is really nice.
That would be a great next step.
We are now.
Actually, I had a couple questions, but one of the things that I keep coming back to is the soccer field that you mentioned. And did you try placing it in the main space at all, or are there other areas that you think may become pockets or breakout spaces?
Right.
A little bit like, where are they going to start? Where are the pickup games going to be happening? And while someone else is shopping at the market, that it's going to happen. So, so I wondered, just your thoughts on that.
Right. There was two reasons why it's not here. One is that soccer fields are very big. And two is that I kind of struggled with it at the end of deciding, do I want to just, it kind of focuses on the male group of the area, so I didn't want to put that, that one kind of, I kind of wanted to put these kinds of spaces where everyone can be, and then having those soccer fields and amenities close to the school and those areas that could kind of work together and not, place a specific sport or a specific group right there in the middle.
Well, I mean, you could argue that having it as a more integrated in the middle of the community is going to encourage all sexes to participate. But,
Sure.
So another thing that I think would be really helpful as you continue to present this to the city or whoever you're going to present this to, because you definitely should make sure that you're getting this out there. So I think it would be really helpful to understand what streets are open all of the time, which ones could be closed off, where the food trucks are, because I think that's a really, you mentioned it and showed it in your drawings, but where that would happen, and is it just that spot?
Yes,
and I could see it being the whole street. And so giving pull-offs and sort of safety areas.
Right.
And if you do have a lot of food truck parking, it's pretty important to make sure that there's sort of safety across the street. Children are going to be going back and forth. So I would give that a lot of thought if you decide to present this.
Sure. Okay. Thank
publicly,
you.
because it's going to be a concern that will come up.
Yes. In terms of the streets that can be closed off, so this is a one-way street that circles around, and then the ground, this is stone, so it changes from the asphalt here, so we could kind of close these streets if needed to have these function together. That was just a small look at it.
And then I think it's a very beautiful presentation, and thank you for taking us so clearly through it. I'd love to understand your thinking a little bit about, and I think I have this right, but it seems like the housing kind of is only on the north side, and that on this side it's primarily office space. I'm wondering what you see how you see that office space occupied, and what types of businesses you would see in that office space, if you've done any research on that, and whether that's something that came from the community or if it's something that was sort of inserted in there, and that whether you thought about residential also being on this side of the street as well. So.
To answer that, this is the bottom floor is retail and commercial, but on top is residential. Here also, this is mainly residential, but on this side, the ground floor, the buildings are mostly services. They're not really retail except for the corner, which is a bakery and a cafe that works with the library, and then the health center lobby, which the health center is on this side, the gym, the vocational school and workshops for job training are over here. And then, so it was kind of trying to keep this more the community resources, and then having the market and retail down here. But they all have residential on top of them.
In terms of the office space?
Office space is, so I have this on the bottom is an anchor store and office space on the top, and then there's office spaces scattered on the Market Street. Just kind of both a block of both residential and like an office building.
I think you did a really skillful job on the areas where you work away from what's the biggest mess. So the biggest mess in Langley Park is the intersection of New Hampshire and University. And I'm searching for more problem solving around that intersection.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you deal with the traffic there? Are we stuck with it the way that it is? Is there another solution that would clarify that and make it a more important space? And it still seems to me diffuse and not, that seems to be an unresolved piece.
Right.
And then that's a project in and of itself. So you could have done that. You did that. You did the streets out and a formal part, kind of formal park where the libraries are located and things like that. But the intersection there is unaddressed. Did you stay away from that because it's so complicated?
A little bit. The extent to which I went is also looking at the plan they do have for it. So what they are doing is they're bringing, right now the intersection is really open. So what they're doing is they're bringing in these corners. And actually I think in some of their plans they're built to the corners completely. I kind of wanted to have a little bit of open space, but then create edges here. And then with the purple line passing through and there needing to be 3 lanes both ways on both sides, it was kind of like, kind of stuck with it, but what I tried to do is add connections close to the intersection around it. So if you're coming up here and you're going that way, you don't need to come and turn, you just pass through here and go that way. I'm kind of adding that in, but that's the extent of which.
And the Purple Line station is
right here. It's here beside this transit station.
So, but the transit station is, wants to be the heart and center of this thing, is way underdeveloped. Did you think about opportunities for making it more important than WMATA?
The thoughts I had, which right,
transportation. Just thought about that. So it's uninspiring.
Yes, it really is. I focused. Well, the ideas I had, which I'm not showing here, was kind of like to actually add a structure underneath it that would cover something, because this is way too high and it's got a hole in the middle, so I don't really know what it's doing. So kind of trying to design this station with a structure that would kind of make that better and give it more spaces, but it was kind of, too little time, I would say.
And your big moves, you've made Barcelona around it, 6-story buildings, added a tremendous amount of density, which is a positive thing. and then you step down, there's no, even libraries, 3 stories not bad for a library, but did you look at creating anything that's kind of an iconic marker or something, a little more recognizable from a distance than anything that's there now? It's fairly flat top and even immediately around your project area. And did you think about pressing height for at least in the future phase for sure, but at least in some part?
In some parts. Do you mean in terms of the library buildings or the other buildings around it?
Library buildings these days are not just libraries.
Yes.
So that, there are libraries and publicly accessible on the lower levels and in urban areas, or urban, higher density areas. There are other things on top. And did you consider that?
The reason that it went down a little bit in scale is I don't know, it was more of it came from going into the community a lot, of not wanting to create something so big and so out of scale maybe, and linking it with the community center and bringing everything that the community center right now has and adding to that, but keeping it at a smaller scale a little bit, and it was kind of trying to keep it a little bit more friendly. That's the reason why I went down. I guess. But for the rest of the development, I did go to the height limit, but I've kind of left the buildings with just simple facades for any kind of changes in the future. So it was mostly about the urban context that's happening there.
First, I want to commend you on the clarity of your presentation and the thoughtfulness that went into it, especially the public engagement that you did. Sometimes you'll see these grand, I'll call them master plans, that really have been concocted in one's own mind without a lot of direct interaction with the people it's meant to serve. So I applaud you for that, and hopefully we'll see something like this. Going back to your vision, though, and your goals, we actually see things similar, maybe not as ambitious, going on in DC all over the place over the last few years and decade, really, right? You have the Navy Yards, you have the NOMA, you have the wharf, and it continues to be now at the forefront of most developers out there and architects and planners, this idea of actually going back to an older version of how we used to live, where you organically had a mixed use of environments that service basically our life. So when you look at those, though, there's always successes and there's also some failures. And when you go back again to your vision, are you concerned that since a lot of this is very prescribed, first of all, humans have a tendency to change their environment. One, that it won't end up being used the way you envision, and how do you think you've countered for that in your design? And then two, the demographics. What do you think about your design has allowed for the demographics, ironically, not to change in the way you envision, but to completely change in another way? And you might look, actually, ironically, the Navy Yard is one of those examples in recent time, a lot of these areas, to make sure that your vision of this inclusivity and the expression of the local cultures and the local businesses continues to thrive. So that's one key thing I'd be interested to hear your response to. The other thing is, I noticed you dedicated a large area to the community garden, and I remember back in my thesis times that was also a popular thing to do, and a lot of us love it. But it's a large area, and when you did that community engagement, was that something that came up as a specific request? Did you get feedback that that's highly desirable? Because going back to some of the comments of my fellow reviewers, that might be an ideal area to give back, to be having more of a flexible use space that could integrate into this larger plan. So just a couple of things, if you don't mind addressing.
Sure. About your first question, that's something that I really thought about, of what am I representing, and what are these streets going to look like, and should they look different? So, but my argument for that is in creating places, I didn't want to go toward creating a specific architecture for a specific group, because I wanted to take away from the lines that exist and not put a name on an area of this is where this culture lives. So what I countered that with was creating street sections, creating the spaces where, as a whole, it has this complete organized look to it, but there are these little pockets of spaces, there are these setbacks, these little spaces where anyone can do whatever they want with, and that could be where the culture, the identity, and everything shows itself. And then your second question was about the community gardens. There's a lot of gardens. The reason for that was kind of trying to create maybe looking at it as a way where it would also serve the food market, the farmers market over here, and kind of bring in income to the community. So kind of like a table to, a garden to table kind of idea. So it was, this area has a lot of gardens in it. That was kind of to maybe create income for the community.
So we need to bring this to a conclusion, and thank you, Sarah. I'm going to give the penultimate word to the grandfather of the Purple Line here, Ralph Bennett, who wanted to make some comments, who wasn't here earlier when Carl was taking his name in vain on all the traffic problems that are being caused on University Boulevard. So Ralph, a few comments from you, and then I'll wrap up.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you, Sara. I commend you for addressing the Gordian knot that is Langley Park. You probably know that some of the earliest resistance to the Purple Line came from Langley Park, precisely from the fear that they would be priced out of the housing. I'm pleased to announce that today the Purple Line Corridor Coalition, which is an invention of Garrett Knapp to try to not only neutralize the objections, but to make sure that all the positive aspects of the Purple Line are realized along it, including jobs, commercial activity, housing, and of course the design of the areas around the stations. You have met the objectives of the coalition. The coalition has released today its housing recommendations, which include not only the maintenance of existing affordable housing, but targets for the provision of new housing and a request for $100 million in funds to incentivize housing development. So you've shown a physical image for the positive character of change in Langley Park, which has been a very hard thing to sell. And I look forward to your appearing before many audiences about your project.
Thank you.
Well, thanks, Ralph. I sort of feel like I should be talking a lot faster here, maybe the summary, given the theme. And you all don't know, but I was in the back of the room going like this to Sarah, slow down. And partly it's because I think Sara is very ambitious, and she wanted to make sure that she covered all the different scales of thought she has really wrestled with in this project, which I think is impressive. From going out to the community, which is always a kind of fraught, is a kind of minefield always, and sort of talking to communities. But I think to her credit, she felt like she couldn't really do this project unless she had some feedback about what this community wanted to be. And so the program that emerged from there, and the concerns she evidenced in all of this, is really the result of her being a good listener. And I think that's characteristic of Sara in terms of her education. She is an excellent listener and takes everything that you say and really thinks about it and comes back with always something more advanced, more thought out, more responsive to what has been put in front of her. This is an ambitious project. I agree with the comments about, what public life would be like. I mean, Corbu famously said, life is always right, we architects must learn from that. So, places will change. And that's what urban design is like. You set up the framework for things, and then communities inhabit the places, and you have to be happy that they customize them for themselves, because that's really what makes them important kinds of, places for community. And finally, Sara, it's been a great pleasure working with Sara. She has already has a master's degree in architecture from a university in Iran. She has a strong interest in community planning, obviously, and that will obviously propel her well into her career. She is a very talented, obviously, designer and illustrator of ideas. But I think the most important thing to understand about Sara is that she's an immigrant herself. And being able to put herself in the shoes of these people and try to understand how they might see things and come to America and have to deal with both the business of retaining your culture while at the same time wanting to be part of something else is something not most people in this room don't undergo. And I think the fact that she has sort of immersed herself in a culture, which by the way is not her own, and tried to synthesize that from an immigrant's point of view is really terrific. And finally, I would just say, if all the people who come into this country grab that idea with the same amount of enthusiasm that Sara has, we're in for a very bright future. Thank you very much. All right, Carl, that one, right?
That way. We're on the next venue over, and we'll be